Okay, chapter 7 of that Hideous Strength, the Pendragon. Um, so I had never heard this term Pendragon outside of the King Arthur story. So in the King Arthur story, at least most of the popular renderings, because there's a bunch of old sources and certain things that we think about. Oh, that's definitely part of the Arthurian legend. Well, that's one of the old stories, but not the other old story. And different bits and pieces came from different time periods, but we kind of smush them together in our mind. But anyway, in the most well-known versions that I'm aware of, Arthur's father is Uther Pendragon. So I looked it up, and so Pendragon is, and I believe it's a Welsh term, but it basically means the leader. So Uther Pendragon, even in the Arthur legends, meant he was the leader. So, kind of like being the king, or kind of like being the guy in charge, whatever name we wanted to give to that. And it's sort of interesting if you think about it historically, that we have throughout history had a variety of names for people who are in charge of something important, like a country or a land or a people. Are they a king? What's the difference between a kingdom and an empire? So an emperor. But one of the things that I legitimately did not know this until I was an adult, and it feels sort of silly. In World War One, the two of the primary belligerents on opposite sides, and the central power, the primary belligerent, was Germany, the German Empire, and one of the part of the Triple Entente was Russia, the Russian Empire. They were led respectively by Kaiser Wilhelm II and Tsar Nicholas II. So they were cousins. They were also cousins with the King of England. Basically, everyone in Europe was related to Queen Victoria. She had so many kids that they get married off for all of these various principalities throughout Europe. So they're all related to each other. So Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar Nicholas, and King George, something was he? I think it was George V or something. Whatever. One of the King of England. They're all grandchildren, I believe, of Queen Victoria, and they're all cousins. But that's not why I'm bringing this up now. The title. Kaiser Wilhelm is the same title as Tsar Nicholas. They both mean the leader and the ruler of the country. And where they come from? Caesar. They are the word for Caesar.
Oh,
in their respective language. And Caesar becomes a title for the Roman emperor based off of Julius Caesar. Before Julius Caesar is named dictator, and then that's the end of the Roman Republic, and we have this battle now after his assassination, which is eventually won by his nephew and adoptive heir Octavian. Octavian takes on the title Caesar Augustus, and Augustus means like magnificent, warlike, super awesome, basically. But again, he takes the title Caesar to make a direct connection, like, I have this job because of my adoptive father, Julius Caesar. And then for a long time, the Roman emperors took that as a title, not as a name, but a title. And now, almost 2,000 years later, we have European monarchs naming themselves Kaiser and Czar for Caesar. So it's just this weird little thing It just basically means, the leader, the ruler, the guy in charge, and that's Pendragon. And we finally meet the leader. So Pendragon is, our chief, this leader, um, that Jane finally gets to meet. So now that she has had these super vivid dreams about being basically interrogated by the man with the little goatee and the little glasses, and then she sees this guy in the store or wherever with the city square. She's now had it. She is straight off to go back to St. Anne's. And she reaches St. Anne's. There's Mrs. Maggs. So now she's got this little bit of a personal connection there. She gets the denizens are there. Miss Ironwood is there, and they're saying, okay, we're you need to meet Mr. Fisher King. Now, again, this is very Arthurian. So Mr. Fisher King is a pseudonym for this leader, this Pendragon. And that too is connected to Arthurian legends. The Fisher King was one of the Arthurian stories about a man whose physical condition matched the state of his country. So as he physically deteriorated, his country suffered. There were droughts and famines and difficulties in the land. And it took the healing of the Fisher King to heal the land. That has been subsequently rolled into stories about King Arthur himself, about how King Arthur and his estate is deeply connected to England and to the land. Parts of the legend having to do with, an eventual return of Arthur to save the land one day. England will be healed at his return. I mean, all these sort of things get wrapped together, but the legend of the Fisher King has to do with the physical health and the kind of national spirit almost in a way that affects everybody. That the people are kind of dour and glum, but also the land seems to suffer alongside the physical ailments of the Fisher King. The flowers don't bloom very well, and the rivers dry up, and the animals starve. So this deep connection between the ruler and the land, as though they were inextricably linked body to body. So the pseudonym for the leader being Fisher King is not for nothing. And so when we finally meet the Fisher King or the leader, or I'm not sure if they call him something different at this point, we get some real interesting descriptions. Now, Miss Ironwood, who we've now been informed is actually a physician. We could have taken her as some sort of counselor, maybe a psychologist or something the first time that Jane met her, where she reveals herself to be a doctor and in charge of the medical care of everybody in the building, but most especially to care for the well-being of the leader, Mr. Fisher King, because he's wounded. So Jane is warned that he's going to look surprisingly young, but he's actually older than you. And that's got to be kind of a funny thing to be warned about. And throughout the time that she spends with him, she seems to go back and forth very deeply. How could I have ever thought that he was old? How could I have ever thought he was young? Certainly he's not young. Certainly he's not old. But it's almost like one of those pictures that are, I don't know if you've seen these. They're pretty cool. They're actually printed on. You think it's a flat surface, but it's not. The surface is actually at angles, and so you have the image printed on one angle and a slightly different one on another angle. And so when you stand on one side of the picture, it looks like one thing, but when you move, it looks like something totally different. It's kind of this optical illusion based off of your position. And so this almost seems a little bit reminiscent of that. Depending on what he says or what he does, Mr. Fisher King seems to be obviously old and wise or youthful and vigorous. And it seems to keep switching as though you can't really pin it down. He has a beard that she normally dislikes, but there's just something about him that she just sort of instantly gravitates towards. And all of her defenses, all the stuff that she's sort of tells herself, I'm not going to get sucked in, I'm not going to bow down, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. She actually gets in his presence. And it's like all that stuff just kind of falls away. And all she can do is just basically be very honest, very open, and very humble. This is a silly sideways story, but I remember this is many years ago, and I had been somebody made a referral to me, or not, or they referred me to this open position to this very prominent church in another state. And the person who kind of nominated me for this position was really good friends with the rector, who was this very prominent seminary professor, who this prominent church had hired away to kind of take things over. And this guy was like super well known and kind of a celebrity. And anyway, I was up for this job, and I didn't know any of this stuff, but I was kind of given sort of the bare sketch that, oh, this guy's like really important and this job is really important and I'd really like you to consider it. So anyway, this rector calls me, and I'm just sitting in this other office, and I get the call on the phone, and from his first sentence, this man had a way about him and how he spoke. And it was just, I mean, it was over the phone, like 4 states away. And I remember feeling myself start to stand as I spoke to him. Like, something just kind of came over. Like, it was like the Hail to the Chief had been played and the president was coming in the room, and you almost were just reflexively stand up, like, oh, I guess even in person, he was like that, but I just really remember I never met this guy, but something about him, even over the phone, and I felt like not just intimidated, but that there was this almost regal presence, and I sort of felt like I should be standing at attention or something. So I don't know if this is if you ever had a similar sort of experience where you were just around someone and you could tell that there was something different. There are some people, this is a different kind of feel. There are some people who, and I can happily talk about, all of God's people, or, his righteousness, we're all saints and all this kind of stuff. But I've been around people that I believe were genuinely saintly in like a obvious way. And they almost radiate something. And just being around them, and you could just kind of feel it. Hard to describe, hard to define, but almost in a palpable sense. Like if they were drawn in a comic book, there would be rays radiating from their body or something. Like you felt this. They didn't even say anything. It's almost like there was just something coming around and off them. So this is what I'm getting from her time with it, just being in his presence. So we have not read all of the books together, but if we had, we wouldn't have to wait for the next chapter or so to realize Mr. Fisher King is Elwyn Ransom. This is Ransom, the protagonist of the first 2 books. He is never named in this chapter. But again, if we had read out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra and then moved right into here, especially Paralandra, we would have recognized how that book ended with him being returned from Venus, returned looking even more youthful than when he had left. And of course, in the final climactic battle against Weston, who had been fully and completely possessed by the devil, referred to as the Unman, that the possessed body of Weston had bitten Ransom's heel and clamped on for dear life. And then after beating him off and the body of Weston being tossed into the core of the planet and basically melted in the magma, that wound never really healed. And so we see this after effect even now. Being in such a young planet and in the presence of basically the birth story of an unfallen world has changed his physical body in this more spiritually perfect way. He's neither young nor old. This is a description that will match something that C.S. Lewis describes in the last Narnia book. In the last Narnia book, we actually meet characters after their death. And in a restored world, some people who have either died or we've known from other books long ago are returned. And there's a description of not being able to really tell how old they are, seeming neither young nor old, whether they have a beard or not. There is some ineffable quality of their essence that shines forth in their physical body that is not pinned down to any one time period in their life. And as we think about the resurrection, that's basically what C.S. Lewis is kind of hinting at, that and that I love preaching about the resurrection, the resurrected body of Christ still bears wounds, but he's still identifiable as Christ, but sometimes not. And what all these profound things mean. Our resurrection, if it is to be like his, will mean there is something definably unique and personal about us, yet also different. And so one of the ways that Lewis has kind of speculated about this and conveys it in a literary fashion is this sense of the kind of the purest essence of you. What picture do you have in your mind of yourself, not what you see in the mirror? So I don't have gray hair, and I'm like somewhere maybe in my 20s. And I still think and act that way when I'm in the room wrestling teenagers, or I was just over here starting to move stuff in the church to get ready for the VBS set, and I'm picking up these platforms and I'm dragging them across as though I was like 26. Because in my mind, perhaps maybe even in my heart, I am not 50 pushing 51. So in the resurrections, Lewis is saying, a perfected, glorified body, why would it be limited to a singular vision of a singular time period of our life? What if it conveys something essential about us, but would be recognizable at a variety of ages? We can look back at old pictures of people, and if we know them really well, we can see their face even when they were children. There's just something about it. But you have to know them really well. And maybe even see like a before and after kind of thing. So that's kind of a sense of this with the Fisher King. And, he's going to elaborate for quite a bit about, he's not young, he's not old, he is young, he is old, whatever. But again, I think he is trying to describe something about the resurrection is about the glorified unity of body and soul the way it ought to be. Then Elwin Ransom is showing signs of that, however imperfectly, even now. That's why he's the leader. That's why he's the king. And that's really what as the Pendragon, he basically operates as though he were a king. And even Jane, now being an English subject, they are, tutored in regal affairs way more than I would have been. I don't understand the whole subject versus citizen thing in a practical way. But, they've all been taught, I presume, to, curtsy and bow or the right ways that you're supposed to refer to the peerage and all this kind of junk. But she probably would have expected, I'm a modern woman and there's certain things that I do, but, they're just, we kind of, we sort of pretend, you know. Um, this would be relatively early, I think, in Queen Elizabeth's reign. I think her father has died by now. This is like the early 50s, I guess. Um, but anyway, like, I mean, she's really a person, but you kind of you have the trappings of these old traditions and customs. You bow and you curtsy and your majesty and your highness and all this kind of stuff that she probably thought she was above. But now she's met someone, he's not a king, but he is kingly. Just like meeting a saint who is saintly. Something just exudes off of his presence that, like, if there ever was a real king, like in the storybooks, who inspired legions of knights to go do brave deeds, it must have been someone like this. I can't put my finger on it. I can't exactly explain it, but just being in his presence, listening to this guy, seeing him, hearing him, feeling what's happening around me, this man is kingly in a way that I maybe didn't even think existed. So that's what a lot of this is going to be, I think, seeking to explain. Ransom has been in the presence of such profound and powerful spiritual forces for the good. And we've even had little bare hints that certain things are happening even now that he's connected to and that she's not ready for. But this is where we have kind of re-meeting someone that we have, if we read the other two books, we would have felt real familiar with, and we're kind of wondering, well, where is he? And now he's here, but he's even different than we would have expected because things have happened over the course of these last few years. But he has said something powerful is happening. Something dangerous is happening. There is an attack, not just on this area or even England, but on humanity. But we've had a sense that it may be happening soon and it may be happening nearby. And it's really the visions of Jane which confirms that it's true. And the nexus, the center of the next great battle for the fate of humanity is happening in this little English town, this little college town, and it's happening soon. Why would the fate of the world come to a moment of great decision in Sebring? In Fort Meade, some little town that seems like it's way too unimportant to have such a significance. But that is, that's basically what he's explaining. Her visions are a part of this confirmation. Yeah, just take it. So that kind of terrifies her, but it's also been something significant for her to feel like, okay, well, then I'm in. Like, in the same manner that in his presence, all of the stuff that she said, oh, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to keep everything at arm's length, it all just kind of falls away. She's making, there's not even a conscious choice at that point. Should I continue to act in this way or should I continue to act in a different way? It just all kind of burns away in the light of the truth. And she feels kind of the same way about, well, now I know, and I've got to be here. Here, this is where I belong. This is where I'm the safest. This is where I'm supposed to be. Um, but that's not what he wants her to do. And this seems so almost incomprehensible to her. So where does he want her to go? You got to go back home. You have got to try one more time to reach your husband. And she has some just real interesting mix of feelings and thoughts and emotions about that. And it's a little conflicted and it's a little trying to make sense of it before she kind of, I don't know, when we see this in children, we like to think that we grow out of it. But a child pouts in such a way to gain attention. When you've done something that they don't like, or you've punished them, or you've taken something away, there's this kind of, and it's really to express their displeasure so that everybody can see it, but also to spur them on to then change something about what they've done to try to reach the person who's pouted. Oh, no, I didn't mean it, or let me make it better, or whatever it might be. The one of the great moments in uh, the classic, the modern classic movie A Christmas Story, is when Ralphie is being punished for saying the F word on accident when his dad is trying to change a tire, and then he gets the mouthful of Lifebuoy when he gets back home. So you your mouth full of soap because we're going to wash your mouth out full of soap. And as he's kind of crying his angry tears about the great injustice of having soap in his mouth, he then gets this little vision. And every child has had this, where they would be struck blind, and then the parents would know how unfairly they've treated him, but it'd be too late. Too late. Now you must live with your guilt. And so they see Ralphie coming with his blind man's glasses and his little begging cup. Oh, what is done to lead you to such a low estate? And he said, no, I can't tell you. I can't possibly tell you. Oh, you must tell us. Was it something we did? What? It was soap poisoning. Oh. So this sense of, kind of that overly dramatic pouting, and that will make people come to me and try to assuage my feelings as they assuage their guilt and whatever. So we're getting some of this within Jane about she's going to kind of make up these dramatic stories in her mind about her and Mark. But in the presence of the Fisher King, even those don't last. They just kind of melt in the heat. And it comes back to very simple things. You know what? We're both just kind of stupid. We're both pretty immature. We're both pretty selfish. And I'm trying to blame him for stuff, or I'm trying to pretend how sacrificial and noble I am about hanging into a marriage that is, maybe we were a little too young, or we were a little too naive, or we were a little too self-centered, or whatever it is. And then it just kind of comes crashing back down to reality. We're both kind of at fault here. He's not done anything any worse than I've done. Nor is it anything that's so dramatic that I ought to toss this marriage away. I ought to actually grow up a little bit and take some responsibility and some agency and do the right thing. So the right thing, as Ransom is mentioning to her, the Fisher King, um, is not to engage in the endless speculation of, well, did I marry the right person or not? I remember a seminary professor once saying how much he hated the kind of cultural expectation that there is the one, capital O, for everyone. And your goal, your romantic goal in life was to find that person that you were built to uh, to connect with uniquely and eternally. And he said, um, well, I think what God wants for you is the one you're supposed to be married to is the one you get married to. That's the one. And it was this almost backwards way that we tend to look at it, but it's actually the forward way. We've stopped looking at it in those terms. Rather than, well, I am chasing an experience of this, being swept off my feet, or the chemistry or the romance of it. That, whoever I marry ought to be the person who makes my heart go flutter. And if this person doesn't make my heart go flutter, they must not be the one. All this kind of stuff. It's like, no, ultimately marriage was, again, if we're talking about biblical love, it is about commitment and faithfulness, and is much less about emotions and feelings. Not that emotions and feelings are wrong, but that the commitment and faithfulness is what is at the heart of holy matrimony. For that is the example of God and his church, of the Lord and us, his people, not constant ecstatic romance, but enduring faithfulness, even when we are probably pretty hard to love. That God's love for us, the faithfulness and commitment, does not wax and wane with our emotional states. And so the one is the one you're married to. And this little bit of practical advice I have given to people in marital counseling, premarital counseling, and I'm just giving it as a sort of a general statement that you can do almost at any time and anywhere. When you are feeling like your relationship with someone is in a negative place, or it's breaking, or it's suffering, or it's dying, and this isn't just, again, it's not just husband and wife. This could be almost any relationship. Catholic moral theology places love, the center of love is in the will. So you make the choice to act in loving ways towards that person. Yeah, but I'm not feeling it. Okay. Choose to act in a loving way. What would be a loving way to speak? Okay, well, I can make them dinner. I can be polite when they say something. I can be present when they need me. I can, whatever. And you just come up with some practical ways that you can act in a loving fashion. If you will commit to do that, you will find your emotions will be very hard to stop coming along. They will be pulled into your will, and the feelings of affection and fondness and all this, the squishy stuff that's very good, you will find flowing back, because our emotions will follow our wills if we give it the chance. And this is the model of biblical love. And this is, as the Fisher King is saying, well, my masters wouldn't even bother to ask. They're not interested in what your opinion is over was like, should you have married somebody other than Mark? Because holy matrimony is a sign in its own small way. It's a holy mystery of Christ and his church, which is sacrificial, which is devoted, which is not about how perfect we get stuff, but about how faithful God is no matter what. And so you ought to be married to Mark because you are married to him. Whoever it is that you married, marry with all of your heart and do it with your full commitment rather than wait for someone else who might make you feel differently somehow. And that's what's being proposed here. I take some time on this with a little bit of foreshadowing that this element of biblical love as expressed in the mystery of holy matrimony will continue to come up in this book. It's almost a surprise that if you were not prepared for this, that it's going to keep coming up. Is that because everybody ought to be married and marriage is the only thing that's no. But again, this is Paul writing that there's a holy mystery connected to this estate of the marriage of husband and wife that shows us in some small but meaningful way the relationship between Christ and his church, and that we ought to take with great seriousness. So we are getting into a level of obedience. We don't like obedience as maybe as a species, but certainly our culture. Obedience is old-fashioned. Obedience is negative. That's what servants do, slaves do. You know, we are empowered, we are independent, we are free. Obedience sounds so not just old-fashioned, but like, what am I, a small stupid child? We don't like that, but there's a beautiful turn of a phrase that happened just recently in the church. It is a prayer from the back of the prayer book that is often used, and I used for Memorial Day, which as of this recording was just our last Sunday. The prayer in the back of the prayer book is the title is For Heroic Service, and that is giving thanks to God for those men and women who in the moment of decision ventured much, as applied to the Memorial Day, where that's where those people who in the service of their country have laid down their lives. That is the purpose of Memorial Day. And it says, the line is something about, how we who are still alive should not rest in light of that sacrifice. We should not rest until all know like the joys of those freedoms, but also share in its disciplines. That the liberty this nation was founded upon has disciplines. Freedom in both a kind of metaphorically American story way, but the freedom in Christ that Scripture points to is a freedom, maybe for the first time, to truly be obedient, to choose the right, to choose the good, and to follow humbly where we could not before. We were incapable. We weren't able to. Any freedom that is simply chaotic does not remain free. Free to choose the good and to do it then becomes a very profound understanding of the purpose of liberty. America is at its best, not when it's at its most chaotic, but when it is free to choose the good, and it does. And that is true within the American dream and kind of our founding myths and stories and hopes and dreams and everything else, but it is also true of humanity. And it will be true of Jane. When she is obedient to her wedding vows, she will actually be more free than she is now. We, this is a, this kind of it's a philosophical thing, but this is grounded directly within the teaching of Scripture. We serve some kind of master, everybody. It's not a question ever of do you serve a master or not, because you do. The only question is which one. And is that master actually worth serving? We can say, "Oh, I don't have a God. I don't have a faith. I don't have a belief." Everybody has some fundamental founding principle that everything else bends toward. This is the one paramount thing. And we act as though this thing is our God. Again, this likens to something that another seminary professor told me that I thought was a really great way to put it. A very simple, but often overlooked subtlety. God is not a name. God is a title. The idea being whoever it is that made all that there is seen and unseen is God. Like that's whoever can do that, whoever did that, whoever manages that has the name of your title is God. But his name is actually something even deeper and more profound than that. So whatever it is that has the end of the line, go no further, this must happen priority within your life is your God. And it could be your desires and satisfactions. It could be money. It could be power. It could be your self-respect. It could be somebody else. It could be an idol, like any number of things. This is getting into the time where idols are not just, serpents and birds made of bronze. Idols are anything that we put in the position that ought to belong to God alone. And so the freedom that we find in obedience is being free to obey the one who actually loves us and desires us to be free. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. When we do the right thing, we often surprisingly find it less of a burden and easier. It feels lighter than the way we were fighting against it before we decided to do the right thing. It's not entirely unlike I will, as somebody who builds and makes things, I tend to be a measure once, cut twice kind of guy. That's the opposite of what you're supposed to be. The saying is measure twice, cut once, meaning take care, have everything laid out and planned accurately so that when you actually go to do it, you only have to do it the one time. I tend to go too fast. And so I make more work for myself by having to constantly fix stuff that I did wrong the first time. Obedience to God puts us in a position to choose the right and the good so that we're not always chasing our mistakes and fixing our messes. Sometimes it's actually less work and less effort to do it right the first time. Doesn't look that way. From the get-go, we think, oh, it's going to be so much harder. I don't really want to measure twice. Or whatever silly thing we might say about the right way to do something seeming more complicated, more difficult. But it then avoids all of the nonsense after the fact. Do the right thing by your marriage, by Mark. And even though it seems onerous, difficult, unfair, overly complicated from here, it will actually pay off in the long run far more than you can imagine. These are themes that, again, will be repeated throughout the rest of the book, which is why I think they were worth unpacking a little bit, because this is the first time we've met Ransom again, and he is laying out something that's not just changing the course of the story, it's changing the course of Jane. and who she is as a person kind of fundamentally changes from here on out. Purifies. I would say the purity of clarity, knowing this is what I need to do, but also the purity of innocence restored. She seems less cynical, less worried about other people's opinions, less worried about her status. There's a clarity in her from this moment on. All right, so we sent her back. And remember the riot that Mark was writing an article about before it happened? It's now happening. That's exactly what she walks into. She takes the train and gets off, and it's right in the middle of these riots they've basically manufactured. So everything that's happening is the riot that Nice has designed in order to, number one, eliminate people or objections that might get in their way, and number two, basically take a stranglehold of everything. Because people are going to be so upset at the turmoil, at the damage, at the destruction. This is unacceptable. They will turn to Nice and they will say, please fix this. Please use your scientific expert opinions and analyses and techniques and fix this. Of course, they are simply solving a problem that they themselves have created. But we now have something very interesting that's happened, because Jane has been caught. She's been caught by the Nice police. She actually meets Hardcastle face to face, which was going to be creepy enough as it was. But that was until Jane gave her name and Hardcastle figured out who she was. Oh, it's you, the wife of my good friend Mark. We've been very eager to meet you. And I've made that sound way more pleasant than it actually was. Hardcastle gives every sense of about to sexually assault Jane. And she does assault her, burning her with cigarettes. This is the revelation of the creepiness that we might have felt towards Hardcastle, confirmed as her being a sadistic monster. Jane is almost out of body at this point. She knows she cannot tell them about St. Anne's. She knows, I don't know what to do with this, but I know that I can't give them up. So in her silence, she's tortured. But in the end, the riot has kind of gotten out of control, even for Nice. And even Hardcastle has to turn and run at some point because things are getting a little too out of hand. And though they had bundled Jane up and it looked like she was about to be taken as a prisoner back to the Nice headquarters in Belbury, suddenly she has been left free. Basically, so they can save their own skins. And that is really where we leave the chapter. She has, in what I think might be a fearfully accurate description of being tortured, where your mind almost disconnects from your body. You just can't take it all in. But now as she's sort of vaguely coming to, and the only thing she can say is, take me back to St. Anne's. This helpful couple in a car who's willing to give her a ride. So in this chapter, so much has changed. Something has changed very dramatically, and I think very fundamentally within Jane, within the presence of Ransom. It's changed within the narrative of the story. Now that the riot has come, these things are no longer speculative. Everything is starting to really happen. The violence is here. And for the first time, the chapter itself has only been with one protagonist. This has been Jane's chapter from start to finish. Though it's had subsections, we haven't seen Mark once. So, and you had speculated like, well, perhaps this is this clue that Jane is the real key to all this, and this is really her story. And I will say, to some degree, you are right, but we're not done with Mark yet, and he's about to have his moment too. What that will mean, and is he too far gone? Is he now strictly the enemy, or is the vision of marriage that has been given to Jane still have something to say about their lives and about the story? We're going to have to continue to work through. So we're going to take 2 chapters next time and see how that goes. That will be chapters 8 and 9 rather than just one at a time. We'll see how 2 goes down. I have been repeating again and again that the pace will quicken and the story will accelerate and things are going to start moving. And I'm hoping that you're seeing this from like the difference in pace between the first 2 chapters and now is starting to, it's moved from a gentle walk to a jog, and we're starting to run, and we're like halfway there. So as the civil disorder begins to spin out of control, the vaguest of hints we've been given to the larger story are now going to start becoming more a part of it. So if we can trust what Ransom says, this isn't just a bad bureaucracy, and this isn't just civil unrest, but something is unfolding here, and talking about the fate of the world, the fate of humanity is not out of place. Anything else?